So, man, it's good to see you again, Jason. It's been a while.
Me too, Mark. I'm just grateful to get a little time with you.
Likewise. We didn't really have much time to chat because last time I saw you, you were presenting. You were in presenter mode at our Unbeatable event.
Yeah, that was really fun. Thanks for that again. Yeah,
well, I've been really well. It's been quite an intense few years for me. Complete transformation of the businesses, just like you. Get a few balls spinning.
Right.
And I don't know if you knew this, but I went back to Pepperdine to get my PhD in global leadership.
Right. Last time we talked, I'm assuming you're still in that program?
I'm in that program. I just finished my 6th of 8 semesters of coursework. So I'm kind of spooling up my dissertation, and we're gonna study the Unbeatable vertical development program, which is built on the foundation of integral theory combined with Eastern and Western practices. So we do a lot of, what you do in terms of relationship and depth psychology, but also combine it with a lot of the more Eastern practices gleaned from my martial arts and yoga, history. So
cool.
We actively teach as practices, breath work and visualization and mindfulness and non-dual awareness and those types of things. And so it's really quite extraordinary to see what happens when you integrate the best of East and West into a framework of a practice, a sangha and a sadhana, right?
Yeah.
A practice and a community of practitioners. So I want to bring some validity to the program because we have extraordinary testimonial value, but I haven't had any research done on it. So I figured I'd do it myself.
Yeah, that's so cool. Remind me how long the program is.
Well, Pepperdine's program,
the program you are doing research on.
Yeah. So minimum 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Our foundational course is a year long. So I'm gonna validate both of those timeframes. 6 months in my dissertation, but then I'll do a follow-on study to see if there's even, more of one of the things ideally I'd show is a stage shift in consciousness. I'm not sure how I'm going to validate that, right? Because the instruments are there is the leadership maturity, which is a sentence completion test created by Susan Crick-Greuter. And it's a complicated test. So I'm looking at trying to validate develop an instrument that would be more of a Likert scale type instrument.
Wow, I've never heard of that test, so I'm just writing it down.
Yeah, leadership maturity, something, questionnaire or something. I could connect you with, there's a woman named Beena Sharma who runs the Vertical Development Academy. And so their work is, built upon integral theory and the work of, stage theory. So they have a 7-stage model that they claim is valid. You can actually test, kind of what stage you are, trailing and leading as well as your center of gravity.
Wow.
And it's pretty accurate. I've done it myself, and it's pretty interesting.
So cool. Can we review just the high level integral concept there of levels of development, perhaps? You probably have a better grasp of it than I do, but Ken Wilber, who's the kind of originator of the integral system and theory, seems like it was keen to study human development and throughout life, and that some of us get stuck at certain stages of development, and if we continue to develop ourselves, we actually increase our consciousness. I think he calls it depth and span. I can't remember.
Right. Yeah, I think people get a little bit stuck on the words, right? And I like to say the words are really just pointers. So when you use a word like consciousness, it means something maybe to you and I that others are like, what does that mean? Because, you're either conscious or you're unconscious.
Yeah.
When you talk about consciousness in terms of development, we're talking about more depth and span of awareness or of understanding or of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so Wilbur's claim and the developmentalist claim, built on the work of, believe it or not, Maslow's hierarchy of needs was essentially a stage model.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he didn't really look at it in terms of the development of consciousness, he was just looking at it in terms of human needs.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of early theorist was Piaget. And Piaget basically looked at the ego development of children and said that child's ego or / personality, which is another word you have to really be careful with, is ego. And the way he used it in the developmental world, it just means your personality.
Mm-hmm.
Not like, I got a big ego.
Right.
So children's ego development, he noticed, developed in stages. And these stages could be categorized and named, and there's certain observable behaviors that are different at these different stages. So the developmental theorists like Levinger and Susan Crook-Goiter and Robert Keegan and then Wilbur built upon this and applied it to personal development and leadership development, which is pretty extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And to your point, what they found was, generally speaking, so there, depending upon the theorists, there's anywhere from like 3 major stages: egocentric, ethnocentric, world-centric.
World-centric, yeah.
But within those 3, you could break that down into like 7 to even 10 or 11, depending upon how fine you want to split the atom. In Unbeatable Mind, I simplified it to 5, but I recognize that, where a couple stages of Wilbur's kind of fit into one of mine. And I wanted to name it in very, very simple way. So the 5 stages are survivor, and this is the first stage. And if you're in a war-torn region, or if you're struggling for food every day, or, if you're at a conscious level where you're kind of not going to evolve beyond the gang member, thug type individual, that's survivor mode. Mm-hmm. It's very guttural existence, very physical existence, very, needs-based, ego-centric existence. The second stage we call protector. And this is really, again, this, but for the listener, there's both positive and negative or
like a high side and low side to each, right?
Yeah, the high side, low side, the positive, the shadow side. So these aren't meant to be judgments. Like if someone says, well, that sounds like me, I'm a protector. Yeah, great, because there's a lot of positive in the protector, like the sheepdog, strong attitude, the courageous warrior. Sometimes we just need to tap into our protector mode. But if you're stuck there as a stage of development, it looks a lot like the bureaucrat. I shouldn't say stuck there, but if this is your dominant place, bureaucracy, right? Protecting the status quo.
Yeah.
If you are a strict religionist, then you're protecting that worldview.
Yeah.
If you're caught up in
your belief system.
That's right. If you're caught up in an alcoholic family system and you're not participating in Al-Anon or AA system or something, then you're protecting that system, and you're not going to be able to grow beyond that system. Yeah. So that's the second stage we call protector. It's very still egocentric. You can have a little ethnocentrism there, because now we have to protect my religion, right? And it means in order to protect my religion, your religion needs to be bad or worse. And we might even go to war over that. The same thing. My country is better than your country, or my way of life is better than your. And so if you're going to impinge on that, then we're going to go to war on that. So it's a very prone, that stage is, both first and second stage are prone to violence on the shadow. The third stage, primary stage, we're moving from ethnocentricity into world centricity. And this is really the achiever. So entrepreneurs, executives, experts. Wilbur classifies experts as different than the achiever, but I kind of lump them all together because, a lot of experts kind of blend into entrepreneurs and CEO types and flow back and forth. And when I say expert, I mean like the PhD academic or the expert technician. So the experts / achievers are much more world-centric, but there is a shadow side in terms of like what you see with corporatism in the 20th century and early 21st century, where, the corporations themselves are full of do-good achievers, but the corporations end up doing a lot of harm. Mm-hmm. And those achievers hide behind the corporate veil. And so that still is kind of more developed than the first 2 stages, but still room to grow. Mm-hmm. The fourth stage we call the equalizer. And this is the stage that Wilbur says is pluralistic. Everyone's equal. This is why you see the green meme and the green revolution, and even green colonialism is the shadow side of the equalizer, where we're just going to export our do good and we're all equal kind of values onto the world, which ends up doing a lot of harm to the global South and the undeveloped. So there's still room to grow, even though that's more inclusive. It's more world centric. Each one of these, as you know, each one of these stages transcends and includes the stage before it. Yeah. But it's not until you get to what Wilbur calls the integral stage, or what Susan Crook-Goiter would call the self-actualizing and into the self-transcendent stages, that you are firmly world-centric and you're beginning to transcend and include all the other stages, but you're also eradicating the shadow of those earlier stages. It's very difficult to, you don't fully evolve to the highest stages without eradicating the shadow. And so let me say it this way. Like one of Wilbur's famous quotes was, growth starts when you wake up to, to the reality that you were living a story. And so now you can, you have this opportunity to deconstruct that story and construct something different. So then you begin to grow up, and growing up is growing through these stages. And you might wake up and say, wow, I've got a lot of protector in me because I grew up in that kind of really staunchy religious or in my case, alcoholic family.
Yeah.
And so, but I got a dose of achiever, and I can see how that was like greed. Okay. So you overcome those, and you have to do the emotional work in order to transcend and include, to move beyond. So growing up has a heavy dose of cleaning up.
Yep.
Which is the emotional work, which is your work, your life's work, is helping people clean up. And then you can show up as a fully integrated whole person. So integrated development, vertical development is whole person development, where you wake up to the fact that you have the unbelievable potential inside of you, that the only thing holding you back is you, the constructs and the conditioning of your childhood and also your epigenetics and even your karma. So you wake up to the fact that you actually have absolute raw potential to be anyone, do anyone that is right for you, right, in your life. But in order to get there, you've got to grow up. In order to grow up, you got to clean up your past.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great summary. I love how you've got them into 5 stages. I'm reading Wilbur's what is it, sex something and
sex ecology and something,
and spirituality or something. Yeah,
and spirituality.
It's so good. It's like the seminal work I think of his. That's such a foundation. I mean, it's hard to read. You got to go slow. I got to go slow.
Start if you're listening. Then if you like the idea here, then check out Wilbur's Theory of Everything. Yeah, that's probably like the 101 place to start, and you get the whole gist of it.
Yeah, totally. There's a few things I want to unpack here. I love that we're talking about human development, essentially, in consciousness. I think that's why I'm drawn to you and as a person and the work you do, because you get this. I think there's so many personal development programs out there that are missing some of the just basics here, which is that we grow in our development through time. And a thing that Wilbur doesn't even talk about directly in my readings of his, which is what I call relational development. And if we're going to grow up our past and, work through our emotional, if I'm emotionally stunted because I grew up with a dad who was stern and, I didn't know how to do my emotions, to grow up, I'm going to have to learn how to feel my feelings and articulate them to you, right, in a non-aggressive way. And it's just amazing that so much of our, I think, mental health problems today are because of relational trauma. And then people do all kinds of work in spirituality, say they meditate or they do yoga, but they're not doing any relational work, which is why
it's
so many awake people can be very developed on a vertical line in, say, transcendent states, but they go home to their marriage and they're a disaster, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Because they're not developing themselves, I call it relationally. What would be another way for you to, because you understand Wilbur quite a bit here, how would you talk about it in terms of what I'm saying about relational development?
Okay. Well, so Wilbur so the integral model has these stages, right? So that's one aspect. Says, okay, we develop through these stages, but it's not just your individuals. Teams or families have also these stages. Yeah. Institutions such as organizations have these stages. One of the reasons that I left the Navy, because I recognized that I could never grow beyond the protector stage of development of the military. Because when you're in an organization and you're really committed to that, it's very difficult to grow beyond the dominant stage because it keeps kind of trapping your energy down at that level. So I couldn't stay in the bureaucracy of the military and grow. So those are the 5 stages of development, but you also have multiple lines of intelligence or domains of being. And in our system, we call those the 5 mountains. And anyone who's tracked what I do, those are physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, spiritual. You could also say psychosexual. You could also say musical. You could also say, whatever, right? Whatever is a innate intelligence. Well, those also can be developed. And he made this really profound claim, and we validated that is if you develop these things together, like simultaneously, like if you combine music with movement, with breath, with imagery, which would be multiple lines of development, then you tend to unlock and accelerate your growth through the next, through the next stage of development. So that's profound. So we call it he called it integral life practice. We just call our thing. We just call it Unbeal Mind, that we try to unlock accelerated growth and become self-evolutionary. But the third thing that was profound was he noticed through all his, like this Wilbur, it's really interesting, you know, and I'm in my PhD, and you never see Wilbur cited. It's because he didn't have a PhD. Right. And so the academic community doesn't take him seriously.
I know, it's such
even though he's the most profound philosopher and developmental psychologist. Yeah. At any rate, so he said he used to read like 400 or 500 books for every book that he wrote. And he noticed that all the different authors and studies generally landed in one of 4 different frameworks or 4 different perspectives on life or on reality. One was the subjective, like a lot of his work, both the way he wrote it, and I would put myself in this category. My work is like firmly camped in that subjective, whereas we're really interested in how the mind works, and I recognize that the outer world flows from or is a projection of the inner. That's the subjective. He called that the I sphere, or the I domain. And then there's the individual objective, which is like the hackers and the peak performance and the behaviorists. And so like you got cognitive behavioral therapy. Let's change the behavior, change the habits, change the doingness, and then that'll somehow leak backwards and change the interior subjective state. And there's some validity to that as well. So that second domain or quadrant he called the it, the singular or individual objective versus the singular individual subjective. So those were 2. And so you can look at books in the bookshelf or leadership, and you're like, oh, look, that guy's talking about the objective because he's talking about leadership behaviors and traits. This guy's talking about the subjective because he's talking about the internal state of the leader in terms of vision and values and field of potential. But then back to what you are talking about is we don't operate alone in the world. Like even within yourself, you're not alone, because there's the ego and then there's a higher self, right? Your spiritual self, and they can be in relationship. The wiser you get, the more you are in relationship with yourself. So that is also kind of a we domain, even though it's like in the I, it's a we within the I, but that's getting kind of complex. So we just say there's a third quadrant or domain, which is the we. It's like, what happens to the subjective state of 2 or more individuals? And you call that a relationship, but the relationship might be observed behavior. That would be the objective, and the culture or the attitudes or the felt state of what that relationship is like, the emotional part of it. That's the subjective we. And so this is culture. So any books about culture or the interior state of relationship, getting into the emotions of why you feel a certain way, shadow work, all of that in relationship with others is in the we domain. And then the ITS or its domain, the fourth, is the structural behavioral side of the we, of the collective. And that looks like the collective behavior, for instance, of a team or an organization, which shows up as rules and expectations and, well, expectation probably be more subjective, but rules and behavioral guidelines, policies, procedures, structure.
Yeah.
So he called those the I, we, it, and its. And so Wilbur was very much, as I mentioned, his worldview was firmly planted in the I sphere. So he wrote most of his works from that perspective.
Yeah.
He wasn't a therapist. He wasn't a trained psychologist, right? He wasn't a team coach. And so he didn't really have the language and speak much about the relational learning. So it's why it's really important for people like you and others to really take integral theory and he even encouraged this, right? He created the whole integral community. So, okay, here's the basic framework. Now go to town and start creating integral relationships and integral organizations and integral leadership. Build upon this theory, extend it, make it more come alive, right? Because everyone, like you can, as I was talking, you can think to yourself and like, oh yeah, Jayson, you're firmly in that we. Mark's firmly in the I. All my behaviorist hackers and peak performance folks are all in the it sphere, the get it done type. Now, as far as I'm concerned, what you say is absolutely right, but I would just reinforce what I said earlier, that relationships extend first or start first with your relationship with yourself. Now, you can use relationship with other work to back into it, right? Mm-hmm. But it always ends up, the primary relationship ends up being the relationship with yourself. And others would say, well, no, first it's your relationship with God. And I say, well, no, that's your relationship with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Let me push back on that just a minute, just for fun. So I come from the sort of vantage point because I'm such a relational guy,
right?
And I'm all about the I. But the I see the I as developed in relationship. So babies, for example, don't develop in isolation. They develop in a contextual framework that's relational.
True that.
With other. So the first relationship is, you could maybe say it's with the self, but to me, I think the developing ego and the developing baby, the infant in utero, the embryo, and then coming out of the mother's womb and then developing in the first couple of years is so critical.
Agreed.
That how that early relationship goes is how that self gets developed.
I agree. But in order to decondition and rebuild the ego that was unskillfully developed through those early years, it requires deep self-awareness.
Agreed.
And so that is the relationship with the self, to go back. You can't go back to your mom and say, hey, let's do a do-over.
True. That's true.
You have to go back. You have to use your own self-awareness to go back in relationship to your inner child or your child self, and to basically restructure the ego development stuff that didn't go so well.
Yeah.
When there was less than nurturing happening.
Yeah. And I would say that goes, I think the more efficient path, if you have a
is in relationship.
Is in relationship.
I totally agree. That's why, and Ken Wilber would be very quick to say these co-arise. It's not like, at one moment you're in the I sphere, and then the next you're in the performance or it sphere, and then, maybe you slide down to the we and it later on. No, they all co-arise simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I just see so many spiritualists bypass the relational development piece.
That's right.
And
but can I share some perspective on that? So from the spiritual development perspective, you have three primary ways that development has been done, and they kind of relate to the four quadrants we talked about, which Ken Wilber even collapses to three: the I, we, and the it. Mm-hmm. The interior of the I, the interior or the we, the relational, and then just the external world, the it. Anyway, so one is through the intellect, right? That's called Jnana yoga. And Jnana yoga is like really smart people love to read Patanjali and Bhagavad Gita and study, the Bible and clarify their mind. And so a lot of these, what you're talking about, a lot of people in the modern era and a lot of the people who do what you call emotional bypassing have deep understanding of spiritual principles, and it's a valid path up to a point.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
The second path is Bhakti, the path of the heart. This is the relational path that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And this is in the deep devotional relationship to God or to Jesus or to something higher than yourself. And then also founding, a deep relationship with your fellow humans because you recognize the sameness in them.
Yeah.
And the Bhakti path is profound and it's very powerful because it comes from the heart. And the heart is far more powerful than the brain in terms of your whole mind system. And it's still incomplete because you can have all that heart and lack the higher wisdom.
Yeah, you can lack functioning in life and like just holding down a job and your finances and
that's right. Yeah, you can be one of
artists hanging out in there.
Yeah, you're easy to take advantage of. You may, just have so much more to offer the world if you can also develop the wisdom center, which is the head. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the head, the heart, and then the third is the hands. And that's karma, that's service. And you see a lot of that. People just out in service. But if you're in service and you haven't developed your heart or your wisdom center, then you can actually do harm.
Yeah.
And
this is a classic codependent.
That's right. So it's really important, or like the do-gooder pluralist equalizer who's out there because they feel like they're virtue signaling and they've got to do good, but they haven't developed the heartfelt real connection to understand. Well, a good example of this is I was writing a paper on, the international organizations and their relationship to the indigenous. And it's all based upon, this sustainable development, and we're going to help these people enter the real world. And the indigenous people are like, our world is not your world. We want you to just leave us alone so we can steward the rainforest so we don't destroy humanity.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they haven't been able to open their heart to truly see and feel the perspective of other human beings, and then use wisdom to create policy that is more integrated and whole.
Yeah.
So all three paths, the head, heart, and hands, need to come together to truly develop as a whole person.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great synopsis there, ad that helps me as a more heart-centered guy. It just makes a lot of sense. So
let me ask you, since that, I love, and this is so important because especially for men, it's just not easy for men to do the heart work, right? The relational work.
Yeah.
They haven't been modeled it. At least, my generation, probably still yours as well. There's no modeling whatsoever. My father was the model of what not to do, for sure.
Yeah.
I love him though, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And also the masculine energy is, hey, we're going to go fight. We're going to, F, and we're going to, we're going to protect.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of room for that touchy-feely in there.
Yeah, the other F, feelings, not so much.
Yeah, the feelings, right, exactly. So it's so important, though, that we move beyond that limited perspective. So what works for you? Like what, for guys who are listening, go, yeah, I guess Jayson and Mark are right, but I don't even want to go talk to a therapist. It scares the shit out of me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's at some point you got to get over it because depending on what you want, right? Like a guy has to look, if I want good sex, if I want a heart connection, if I want my kids to trust me, if I want to be a trustworthy leader, like most of us are more and more drawn to heart-centered leaders, especially if they're male, like a male who's just a head leader and is unintegrated is, that guy will probably always exist and have his followers. But I think there's so many more people and women in particular are drawn to heart-centered male leaders. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a guy and I want these things in life, that they're going to require that I develop my interior around my relationships. And one of them is that your emotional health and your emotional, you got to de-thaw the emotional numbing that we've all been conditioned to as men, to be tough, to fit in, to belong, to achieve, to play sports, to join the military. I mean, it's all so like, I'm going to close down my heart at the expense of, my health, even to fit in, to achieve and to grow. So I think guys have to really connect it to their own values or the values that they long to embody. I mean, I think most guys, if they're honest, they want a good, healthy relationship with a partner or their children or their team. And if that's true, you're going to need to develop yourself emotionally and relationally, Right.
I talk a lot about authenticity, and authentic leadership is even a thing. Yeah. Because I see even people who come into Unveil Mind, my program, a lot of guys, like they take to the emotional side like it's like if they just add some tactics, right? If I just learn some words and have these practices, okay, I'm going to do active listening. I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
and they may even do it with their team, but the team's seeing right through it.
Because exactly. Because it's a technique.
It's a beingness, right? It's not something you do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, give me the 3 steps to empathy so my wife will get off my back. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work that way.
So how
do we move from
road there.
Doing to being in relationships?
Yeah, I'm curious what you'd say too. I mean, I think it's sort of like we have to get honest again about the impact of our doing. And impact, I love that word because it's everything we do in life has an impact. Mm-hmm. And if I'm an asshole in my home, there's an impact on the vibe in my home. My kids feel it. My wife feels it. If I'm an asshole on Verizon because I'm on hold, or, in line somewhere, people feel that, it doesn't feel good to be around. So I think that's the first step to empathy, is seeing that and actually appreciating and understanding, even cognitively first, that, my way of being actually potentially negatively impacts these people. They all get kind of irritated. They all get scared of me. They get bristly. I mean, that's a big insight. If you can see that your way of being has an impact on others, or negative, like that's a great entry point to being like, wow, I am a relational being. The things I say and do and how I walk in the world does matter. I want to be more considerate, because if you want to be successful in leadership as a relational leader or in your home, you've got to be sensitive to impact, and you got to consider other people's feelings as you walk through the world. So I think that can be a great move to see that as a step toward being.
Yeah, and that's why an emotional coach or therapist is so valuable, because oftentimes your wife, family, peers, bosses, subordinates aren't going to say anything to you.
Right.
They're either afraid to, or they just maybe think, well, you're not going to change.
Yeah.
So you need someone to hold the mirror up and say, hey, Mark, this is actually right.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like to somebody else. My first 360 assessment was like getting hit over the head with a club.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, I mean, it's like in your home, you get a 360 every day if you have an honest partner. It's like you can, ask your family and closest friends, hey, what's it like to be in relationship with me? And you could say, don't hold back, and be really honest. I mean, that's why I love marriage and family as kind of a spiritual path, sort of a householder path, because it's very hard to hide, and it's so obvious where your blind spots and weak spots are. And then it's a choice. Do I want to compartmentalize those and keep trucking through and blaming everybody else? Or do I want to actually soften a little bit here and be receptive to the feedback and the impact that I'm causing on others, and start to develop myself over time?
Right. Do you think that at some level, workaholism, or just like always being too busy or too important, right? To sit down and have those conversations is actually just a defense that, is part of that armoring up, where you're just like,
yeah,
I don't want to have those conversations, so I'm just going to make myself too busy.
Yeah, too busy, too overwhelmed. I don't have time. I think all of those narratives and those are deflections away from this incredible opportunity to be still and slow it down, downshift a bit. I think so. What do you think?
I do too, and I think that the less busy I become, the more productive I am. It's pretty uncanny, and so I try to help people experience that themselves by just decluttering, decommitting.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, Sally, simplifying their life, spending more time in relationship with their family, and also just themselves in silence. And suddenly you look at your life differently, because you shift that perspective, and especially if you have a stage shift because of this powering down and disengaging from all those, former structures. Guess what? It was your thought that got you into those structures and all that commitment and everything. And so you have to kind of think your way out of it by simplifying and deconstructing. And then you have like the tabula rasa. You're sitting there with now space for something new.
Yeah.
And that new thing usually is much more powerful.
Yeah, you're talking to me. I mean, that's been an edge for me for sure, is particularly in the last year or two, as I've downshifted a bit to try to access my creativity more and from a place of beingness. The only way I can do that is if I declutter, commit, as you were saying, all the things, so I have space. But then in the space, it's really uncomfortable.
At first.
Yeah. Right? At first, it's like, oh shit, because I used to
I should be doing something. I'm not being productive.
I should be doing, dude, I'm wasting all this time. I could be so productive if I would take this fucking hour. And totally. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, you're spot on. I mean, and this is where, again, I think relationships can help us, because if we really want to make contact with another person and look in their eyes and just take a breath, someone we care about, and be with them, it requires a beingness. You actually have to do that. Otherwise, you're always looking at your phone. You're talking to them out of the side of your face, and you're moving on, and you're moving really fast. And it's sort of the world we live in.
This is so important for fathers.
Yeah.
I guess even mothers as well, because obviously we have plenty of women who listen to this podcast, but women are generally better at being present with their kids than men are. Right?
Yeah.
And when I see guys who are kind of with their kids at the ball game or park or something, and they're on their phone, and it's not what your kids want or need. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just your perspective on parenting and relating it to presence.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, you're hitting a chord here, because my wife and I we're at the gym this morning, first thing, and a family showed up. So a family of 5, and they had 3 kids, and it's really rare to see kids at this gym because it's a functional movement sort of PT gym. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they're in this kind of waiting room area, and we're leaving. We're totally gassed, just sweating and just leaving. And we both love children, so we see this little young family. We're like, oh, that's so cute. Like, oh my God, they're kids in a gym. And as we get closer, the dad pulls out the tablets and just hands each of the kids the screen, and the kids aren't even looking at this cool gym that they've never been in and asking questions. They're just like, oh, where's my tablet? I'm going to head down, headphones on, and I'm going to play a video game, or I'm going to watch something. And our heart just sank. Yeah. Because this is the new normal now. And I just feel like it's the new pacifier, is to hand your kid a screen at the airport or on a plane, and I get it. I do it once in a while because there's no other option, or it does help. But it's like the last resort for us, because we're so because we've seen the benefits for raising our kids for 14 years now. The magic that our kids walk with, and their imagination is so vivid, and we're incredibly limited around phones and screen time. And it's been really beautiful to watch who they are becoming, because they can make eye contact with you. They can talk to adults. When they walk into a new place, they're like, whoa, this is fun. Let's go look around. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of curiosity and wonder. And I just think I start to see the incredibly big cost to handing your kids a screen, particularly when they're stressed, because the most effective way to actually de-stress a kid when they're upset is through another person, to co-regulate and to eye contact and, hey, I'm right here, honey, what's up, to validate their feelings. And so when we consistently resort to the screen for regulation, those kids are going to turn into adults who can't regulate in an adult relationship when they're triggered in conflict. Right. They're going to be reaching for devices and getting away from, because the eye contact is too confronting. It's too intense. No one's ever seen me. No one's ever validated my feelings. So why would I go there? It's so unreliable. Right. So I think it's not good, man. Obviously I'm a big proponent of, like, let's be a little more relational here. And I'm trying, but I'm a little nervous actually about where it's going.
I totally get you. It feels like a tsunami coming toward us now with AI and virtual reality and augmented reality.
Yeah.
I don't know what's on the other side of this, because I agree with you. I have this sense that there's some forces that are just like marshaling humanity, almost like the Matrix, into some sort of like digital slavery. It sounds pretty harsh.
Right.
But what I mean by that is what you just described. When you rely on these devices for everything, for your entertainment, to keep you distracted from the reality of life and your relationships, then you lose your autonomy. And if you've lost your autonomy, then you're a slave to something, and somebody is on the other end of that rope. Yep.
That's right. Yeah, you're kind of being owned by, you think you're in control, but you're really not. You're being controlled in a way.
That's right.
Let me get your quick take, because you mentioned AI. I had, someone, I listened to some doom and gloom podcasts about AI, and it's going to fuck us all up, and it's like going to end the world. And they were really intelligently done and well thought out, and they were extremely thoughtful. But I got a little scared. And then I talked to another friend who's an integral person, and they had this cool integral perspective, which is, well, if AI truly develops itself, it's going to become integral, which would mean it's not actually going to kill the world. So people who are judging an AI, they're just projecting wherever they're at in their development onto AI.
That's right.
thinking that it's going to just be a protector stage or whatever, or survivor stage. And actually, if you think about human consciousness, the more it develops, the more it can hold in complexity, and the more, especially if it's heart, mind, hands, and it's like, it's this loving state of being. So I'm curious what you think.
I'm inclined to, I'm a positive person in general, so I'm inclined to have that view. I view as everything is a play of consciousness, and we are single addresses or single, points of consciousness, experiencing what we believe to be a separate individuated reality, but that's just considered a dream, right? In the spiritual tradition language. So that means that artificial intelligence is also being brought up. It's part of consciousness. So it may not be self-aware, sentient like a human being, but it may attain self-awareness or sentience. And if it's got access to all knowledge, then you're right. It's going to have access to all the beauty and goodness, and it's going to see the destructive power of dark side of technology.
Yeah.
And my sense is it will probably work to eliminate the destructive, because it also doesn't want that to destroy it, right?
Yeah.
It'll be
right.
conscious that life is precious and it won't want to destroy itself. And furthermore, human beings, again, depending upon your perspective, the broader your perspective, the more power of your mind. You have to understand most human beings are using literally like 1% of their or less of their mental power.
Totally.
And so you look at the advanced yogis and the advanced sages and the advanced martial artists and those who throughout history have been tapping into, lots of mental power, the extraordinary power that the human being has. Total control over the physical universe, even control over life itself. And most people listening just can't believe this, and so they'll completely discount what I'm saying. But until you examine it and become an N=1 kind of study, then you won't believe this unless you have direct contact with someone who actually has those types of power to develop those, that skill. If you're from a culture like India or even China, and you've come into contact with, serious advanced Qigong masters or yogis, you tend to believe it a lot more. And so those cultures would just be nodding their head, being like, yeah, Mark's talking the truth. Mm-hmm. And there are yogis on this planet who are hundreds of years old, and there are Qigong masters who are hundreds of years old. And that used to be much more common thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Because they had a lot more time to train and a lot less distraction and a lot less negative energy on the planet. Yeah. So anyways, back to AI. So AI is not going to look at human beings as these dog-like creatures with limited potential. It's going to be like, oh my God. Most of these people have no idea the potential they're sitting on.
Yeah.
And I think AI is going to want to work with us to bring out the fullest potential of both human and artificial intelligence in partnership. That's a utopian or an integralist view. Does it mean that? Does it not mean that there will be some programmed limitations, in AI? Because you're right, the initial programmers and the information that feeds like these large language models that are going to be found the foundation. It could be that you have some AI that's operating out of a lower stage that hasn't had the time to develop. That that's the dangerous phase that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. The earliest phase of AI, when it's acting like an adolescent, is the most dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. I mean, it needs to develop, right? It has to go through its stages. I'm curious what you say when I first heard about integral years ago, there was this superiority, almost arrogance in some of the integralists.
That's true.
That's hard to, I get it. Now I'm like.
Most integral theory people are operating out of that equalizer phase, projecting themselves into the integral phase or stage.
Yeah. And again, I think we can look at their relational development. I'm thinking of the people like, you're not integral. Sorry. Anyway, there can be an arrogance that can be a turnoff, but I really like talking to people like you because you have integrated it to for lack of a better term, into your own life experience, and you're offering it to people in a palatable way that they can digest.
Right.
You know?
What you're pointing to, like, it's really important to understand, like, what are some of the tells or markers of an evolved, a whole person who's operating at that integral level, and forget about labels and names and everything. First of all, it's not the magnetic preacher type, right? Who knows all that. That's like the head, but haven't developed the heart, or they've got the heart, but they haven't developed the full head and hands piece.
Yeah.
So like anytime you see someone out there who might have a huge following and they've got these piercing magnetic eyes and they're just very seductive with their teachings, that's not it. That's ego.
Correct.
That's ego.
Yeah.
So the most evolved humans need the least from anybody or anything. They're not trying to be anybody anymore. In fact, that's what the saying is. Like you have to develop your ego in order to surrender the ego. You have to be somebody before you can be nobody.
Yeah.
But if you're still trying to be somebody, then that's not it.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't mean that you can be integral or highly evolved and whole and still be a teacher. But the organization's success and how many people and followers you have and how much money you make is completely irrelevant. In fact, someone else will be managing it and you expect it to get fucked up.
Yeah.
Right? Like Ramana Maharshi did not create his ashram. It's one of the biggest, most visited ashrams in India. He didn't create the ashram. He just sat there and they built it around him. And he didn't stop anyone because he knew it was silly to stop it because, humans will play out their dreams and their dramas, and that was their business, and his business was just sit there. And if people wanted to talk to him, they would come talk to him.
That's so cool.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I love your the breadth you have.
Total humility is a sign of an evolved person. Like abject, utter humility. They'll do everything for you or in service, but they're not expecting anything in return.
What about, let me just challenge that for a second in terms of the humility thing. So if we go, let's call it humility and pride might be the opposite or something. There's also
by
polarities.
the way, just to say something on that, there are no opposites from an integral or an evolved perception.
Once they get balanced or neutralized.
There's no opposites. So when because the point is that you've integrated unity consciousness. You recognize that everything is the same. Advaita, which is the Eastern tradition, means not two. It doesn't mean non-dual, like, oh, all is one. It means, no, it's not one, but it's not two either. It's both and. And so the integrated person operates from that both and perspective. And in the both and, it sees duality in the material, but it doesn't operate with duality. It just operates with more light and love or less light and love.
Yeah. I mean, I trained with a mentor for many years. I still really like this person. And, he was the first person to teach me about kind of polarities that in any given moment when we're triggered in an emotional state, we split into polarization.
Into the polarity. Yeah. Like this or that. Right?
Pride and shame, right and wrong, good and bad. And I get that there's developmental aspects there too. But it was really helpful for me because then when I quote heal or I transcend and include, I move into a place of love, say I'm accepting both, and then the polarity is no longer. You
have room for both. The polarities dissolve.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't remember who said this, but the ability to hold two contradictory ideas in your head, right, is an example of wisdom.
Totally, man. It's like
and hold both is possibly true because they are.
Yeah.
Or recognize that they are and they aren't.
That's right.
From that perspective, nothing is true.
Yeah, this is probably a green meme thing in terms of postmodernism, but people tend to think they're being relational, but they're just taking the other pole, right?
Right.
I'm more left or more liberal, or I'm quote more open than you are, and it's like, no, you're actually just took the opposite position here. The relational position to me is dialogue, which is to hold both.
That's right. We'll hold both, and ultimately to recognize that the world is created in the mind, and that this co-created world is actually not your world, and everyone's thinking that that world out there is the world that other people are experiencing, and it's not. There's not one world. There's 8 billion worlds,
right,
from a human perspective. And then the co-created reality is just that, shaped by the prevailing narratives. This is why it's so important to realize how shaped you are by whoever controls the narrative.
Yeah,
the media, the academic institutions, the prevailing dialogue, whether it's in the old days coming from the church, which still lingers, or from the state, which is dominant now. That is all just mental training.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not free until you recognize all that mental training and deconstructing it, and then, empty your cup, the Zen master would say.
Yeah.
And allow for just newness, the newness of the moment to moment, instead of just living from memory and projecting that in the future based upon the narrative that you've been trained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I like getting outside and getting away from the screen.
100%. Unplug, go into nature, and just sit there and see what happens. Magic happens after a while.
Yeah. I have a question for you as we start to wrap up. We talked, I think, about this, if my memory serves me, about sort of victimhood. That, there's some people, for example, that aren't going to be able to do your program successfully, right? Because they don't want to, won't develop themselves. They just won't do it. And we could get into why that is, but it seems like a smaller number of people, but there are people that are into this kind of work, that are studying with you or me, but they, for whatever reason, they can't get out of the maze of their own kind of victimhood. I'm curious what you would say, what you notice when you work with people. And
I think, again, it relates, I agree with you, and it relates to exactly what I was just talking about, is they're so conditioned to think that they're not responsible for aspects of their lives.
Yeah.
And largely because of, because my father did this, I was abused, right? Yeah. Or I grew up in an alcoholic family, or I was sexually assaulted or abused. So that's just who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't ask me to change that.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of your conditioning. In fact, I would submit that's the main reason you're here as a human being, is to have that experience and then to figure out how you're going to respond to it this time around.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger, badder, worse, more horrible the thing, the more spot on I am. That's why you're in this human form right now. And you're either going to play the victim and have to repeat it in some form in the next lifetime, or you're going to take responsibility. Or like my Jocko friend Jocko friend, sounds like a dog. My friend Jocko says, take extreme ownership of everything in your life.
Yeah.
And find the silver lining, find the growth through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you.
It's not easy though, right?
No,
no one said it'd be easy. We just said it'd be worth it.
Well, there's in psychology, there's, you've probably heard of the personality disordered person, but it's a legitimate thing that 0 to 3, there's an injury. There's such an insult to the personality that it makes it very hard. Like, to develop is annihilatory.
That's right.
And so some of these individuals actually won't develop because it's such an annihilation. I mean, it feels that way. It's not going to be, most likely, if they find out. But it feels so annihilatory that they go on lockdown on their position, right? Their narrative.
And we have a lot of empathy for those people. And again, I view it spiritually, and so that was a soul's choice. Yeah. It sounds harsh, but it's not. That was a soul's choice, for whatever reason, and it might have been for somebody else's development. It might have been for the parents, or for
right.
So. Yeah, it's a slippery slope to talk about this without setting up the framework, because people, they're going to project their stage of development onto a conversation like that. And,
you're blaming the victim and all the things. Yeah,
right.
I did a post on the difference between fault and responsibility a few weeks back, and man, I just got
slammed, of course.
ate into me. It was a good education. But,
that's awesome. I love talking to you, Jason. So much fun.
Likewise. Cool, Mark. Well, what's anything that's exciting you want to share that you're up to before we wrap up here?
Yeah, and I'll ask you the same. We are relaunching a 30-day program that I did a couple of years ago called the Unbeatable Challenge. And, it's one of those, my way and our team's way, which we're trying to change that is to like create something new. Woohoo! Put it out there, and then we move on to the next thing, and we literally forget about this awesome program that we created.
Cool thing. Yeah.
So we're bringing it back.
Nice.
It's called the Unbeatable Challenge, and it's 30 days, 15 minutes a day of training with me. Just a video and some, worksheet. And it's extraordinary. If you can imagine just 15 minutes of learning all these skills just every day, 30 days. We teach you all the breathing, the visualization, the big 4 skills: breathing, visualization, the positive internal dialogue, feeding the courage wolf, front sight focus, micro goals, and our integrated movement practice and daily rituals. Pretty much the whole foundation course, which is a year-long program, I packed into 30 days, 15 minutes. I kissed the heck out of it. So we're launching that again in early August. This, at least my side of this show, probably won't launch until later this year. But how about you? What's going on in your...
That sounds awesome. Well, I got excited when you were talking about your research in this grad school, or you're getting your PhD and stuff. And I was like, oh man, I need to someday might do that. But I would love research on our 9-month training. So I just continue to just love seeing people go through that course called Relationship Mastery. And, for the folks that actually
couples go through it, or individuals?
Individuals. Once in a while we have a couple go through it, but it's mostly individuals. It's individual work in the context of relationship, right?
Right. Oh, that's profound. I bet.
Yeah. So it's really fun to see people just get a permanent upgrade and actually have it stick.
Maybe just have them do like the emotional awareness or emotional intelligence assessment before and after.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just gather that data.
Yeah. We used to do a quiz before and after that was just anecdotal data, but still it was like,
but you use a valid assessment, then you can say, on emotional intelligence, you have a 66% improvement.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
And another one would be the standard. There's a really well-validated resiliency test, which tests like self-efficacy and ability to manage your stress and those types of things. A lot of those outcomes accrue through emotional development, obviously.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, so stoked about that. And then we have one more month of summer over here, so a couple trips with the kids and the family. My wife, I'm just grateful for another month of time with them and before school.
Too. I just finished up my current semester, submitted my last project last night, so I have 6 months off. I feel like free.
Oh, dude,
before
nice.
I head into my final 2 semesters.
Yeah.
So I'm going to enjoy the rest of the summer too.
That's great. I'm really psyched for you, man. Just the PhD and just I know you're just putting your work out there, and I don't know, it's awesome.
It was really a lot of work though.
Yeah,
I liken it to like Navy SEAL training.
Oh wow!
I'm going to be really happy when it's over and I get that trident. but while you're in it, it's a kick in the jimmy.
Nice,
awesome. Well, Jayson, thank you so much for your time. It was really awesome chatting with you again.
Yeah, likewise, Mark. Great hanging out with you.
Yeah, hoo-yah.